In this lesson, we will continue to discuss more about the common denim trims and details and how to achieve them. We will cover the following: 2D trims and seam details. In cases where we do not have a 3D object, we can also use 2D trims. For example, we can add an image of rivets, buttons, tags, and more. Let's add a tag with a logo on this jacket. To do this, we first create a rectangle and resize it to the size we want. Now we want to clone the edges of the rectangle by offset. We offset it by negative 0.25 centimeters. This will be the line that we stitch to the garment. This is so that when we stitch, we will still see the thickness along the edge of the tag. We position the tag on the pattern we want to attach to. Next, we select the internal line and convert it to a floating line. We select the line again and convert it to an internal line. Now the internal line is added to the pattern we want to attach to. Add the tag pattern into the Arrange cluster. Let's disable Use in 3D first. We stitch the internal lines together. Next, we adjust the 3D layer of the tag to be higher than the bodice pattern. Enable Use in 3D, and we dress the garment to simulate the tag. Since the tag is a small pattern, we can adjust the grid size to be 0.3. Use the styling tool to adjust the tag if necessary. Next, we want to add a texture for the tag. We have a downloadable library of miscellaneous textures like leather, crumpled paper, and more to assign to trims. We add the library into the library section of the resource pane after we have downloaded it. Now we can select a material. We can download a leather material if we want. We assign the material to the tag and allow it to simulate for a bit. We want to add in a logo to assign to the tag. We add the logo image in the artwork section and assign it to the tag. We can recolor the logo to white. Next, we want to add a top stitching. We select the edge stitching group. Next, we want to clone it. In the cloned group, we delete or hide the shadows and puckering. This way, we will have a single stitch that we can assign to the tag. We assign the seam to the edges of the tag. We can adjust the corner seam alignment. Click on the corner points along the tag and change the corner seam alignment to meet. To add realism, we can change the stitch construction of the edges of the tag to a directional stitch. Then enable Wash Effect. And we are done! Essentially, adding extra patterns and making some adjustments for 2D trims is one way to make your trims look more realistic in 3D. If you would like to know more about how we can make 2D trims look more realistic, you can check out our lesson on that in the 301 Materials course. We will add a direct link to the lesson within the lesson resources. Pause the lesson here to finish adding the tag on the garment. On denim garments, we often have seen details like bar tacks or decorative stitches. When adding bar tacks, we have two options. We can add a raster seam or a zigzag stitch that we assign to an internal line. For denim garments, we recommend using a raster seam for a more realistic look. We first add a bar tack image as a seam. There are a few options available in the Denim Raster Seams library. Next, we want to adjust the width of the bar tack to how long it would be. We can adjust it to about 0.8 centimeters. Next, we use the pen tool and draw an internal line where we want the bar tack to be. We adjust the length of the internal line to 0.8 centimeters. When drawing the line with the pen tool, it is important to note whether the symmetry option is enabled. If it is enabled, the line will also be added to the symmetrical counterpart. Next, we assign the bar tack seam to the internal line. If the whole bar tack image is not showing, we use the texture tool and drag along the internal line like this. Since we have unchecked Assign Seam to Symmetrical previously, we will also need to assign the bar tack to the other side manually. Adjust the colors to match the rest of the seams. Pause the lesson here to give it a try. Similarly, if we have decorative stitches, we will use the same method of assigning the seams to internal lines. We will use the pen tool to draw the lines. Let's add a line to the pocket. Along the edge, we assign a single needle that is offset by 0.3 centimeters. Then we apply a single needle with no offset on the internal line. Then we add a bar tack near the top edge. We want to repeat this on the other side of the pocket bag. A quick way to do this would be to multi-select the two internal lines, then copy and paste by clicking on Command or Control-C, then Command or Control-V. In the context view, we flip Y. Then align the internal lines on the other side of the pocket flap. Pause the lesson here to complete the steps. Let's see how we can replicate this when working with raster seams. We will need a stitch that is a single needle stitch with no offset and no shadows. We've already created one previously when adding the tag to the jacket. We clone the seam we created and remove the offset value. Now we repeat the steps of adding internal lines. Then we assign this grouped seam to the internal line. When assigning seams along an internal line, we can click on the points along the line and adjust the seam alignment. We can change it to meet. This is to avoid distortion of the seam along the internal line. We can add more lines to the pocket and assign stitches. We can also add other stitches to assign to the edges, for example, a zigzag stitch. Here are more examples of decorative stitches. You can try adding more lines using the pen tool and assigning stitches to the lines as decorative stitches. Try assigning different types of stitches. Before you move on to the next lesson, you can spend some time to materialize the jumpsuit and jacket based on what you've learned. For example, adding rivets and bar tacks, decorative stitches, and 2D trims to the garment.